Welcome to Art History. Picasso once said, "We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth." What did he mean by this? Well, here we have a photograph of Picasso. But we're led to question, is this image more objective, more truthful, because it's a photograph? Is it more objective and more truthful than, say, this self-portrait in paint by the artist? Let's analyze the painting to try and work out the answer. Here Picasso shows himself in three-quarter profile, turned to one side. But this time, we can't see his pupils. Indeed, his eyes are almost blacked out. He seems detached, disengaged, perhaps reflecting. His complexion is fair, and it implies a sort of agelessness, which his photograph lacks. His photograph clearly tells us that he's an old man. But for a man with a small frame, he shows himself with a broad chest. He magnifies his presence. And he shows himself almost with mask-like features. It's almost like a painted sculpture. Picasso seems to want to monumentalize himself, to carve himself out of wood. A monumental image for the ages. Is this painting more truthful than the photograph, despite the fact it doesn't look more real? These are the questions art history seeks to answer. I'm going to show you two portraits of rulers in a moment, and you have to establish whether or not they're fake news. Your first task is to assess how the figures shown, to describe them. You can consider pose, gesture, facial expression, dress, colors, the medium of oil paint, their surroundings, and anything else that seems relevant to you. So the first task is to describe the figures. The second task is, what are the images trying to say about their subjects? Why have they been shown the way they are? So it's a twofold problem. How are the figures shown, and why? Here's your first image. It's one of the three Armada portraits of Elizabeth I. This is the version in Woburn Abbey. Here's your second image. This is David's famous portrait of Napoleon crossing the Alps. Come back to me in a moment when you've made some points. When I consider a new image, whether or not it's a portrait, I always consider the format first. And this is unusual because it has a horizontal format, meaning we read from left to right, almost like a line of text. Here, the composition is dominated by the Queen. Her gesture is expansive, and her scale is monumental. It's rhetorical. It seems to be designed to magnify her presence in space. So we consider the format and the composition. What about the color? Well, this is a good point to introduce the idea of color complementaries. We have a lot of green and we have a lot of red. If you juxtapose green and red side by side, the green is magnified and the red is magnified. What this means is that the composition is unified and magnified surrounding the figure of the Queen. The whole image is saturated, emphasizing her grandeur and her importance. So we've considered the format, the composition, and the color. What about light and tone? Well, tonal modeling has been used to model the porcelain features of the Queen, perhaps emphasizing her beauty. Tonal modeling has also been used to differentiate textures. We can see a silk tablecloth on the left-hand side, differentiated from the satin sleeves that she wears. This is an example of textural naturalism. It shows the skill of the painter. But it also suggests that this is a window through which we are looking at another world, rather than a flat surface. Hence, we don't actually see brushwork. The brushwork has been concealed to create the illusion of another heightened reality. But what does it mean? Well, reading from left to right, we see behind the Queen two windows. In one, the Spanish Armada are being chased down by English fire ships led by Sir Francis Drake. In the other, the ships are crashing against the rocks, languishing. The implication is that Elizabeth is responsible for this. She's a triumphant queen. Indeed, the fact that her hand is placed on the globe suggests imperial ambitions. Her hands are placed on the Americas. She's also juxtaposed with an imperial crown, suggesting that she has imperial pretensions to rival the Holy Roman Emperor. In the front right-hand foreground, we see a finial carved into the side of a chair. This mermaid may represent a reference to Mary Queen of Scots, vanquished by Elizabeth I. Or it may just be a bit of decoration. Sometimes, when trying to analyze meaning in paintings, you can only ever say may. This may be Mary Tudor. It may not. What's unquestionable about the meaning of this painting is that it emphasizes the Queen's purity. Look at all those pearls. Not only the pearls, but the immaculate white ruff that frames her face. The white, the pearls, all of it is designed to emphasize the cult of virginity, the Virgin Queen. This is a scene both triumphant, but also designed to embody her status as a monarch. By contrast, this portrait of Napoleon is vertical, large scale. He's shown in an equestrian portrait, which means this is a scene of a sitter on a horse. In this instance, a miraculous Arabian stallion is rearing back, two hooves in the air, balanced by Napoleon himself. Napoleon's gesture moves to the left. Indeed, his billowing drapery echoes that gesture and balances with the rearing figure of the horse. So composition is balanced around the figure of Napoleon. So we considered format, and we considered the way it's dominated by the Arabian stallion and the ruler himself. But what about the colour? Well, here we have an example of bold colour primaries, red, yellow and blue, as well as the white of his gloves, which sets off the white of his face. This is an image of youthful vigour, emphasized by the illumination of the white hide of the Arabian stallion. Total modelling has been used to create the illusion of three-dimensionality, to make him look more real. Is this an act of fake news? Well, we know that Napoleon was only 5'6", and yet here, if he was standing, he would probably be as tall as the horse. So, there's something rhetorical going on here. Indeed, Napoleon said himself, nobody knows if the portraits of great men resemble them. It's enough that their genius lives there. Indeed, he refused to sit for the portrait. So David replaced his model with one of his sons, decked out in Napoleon's finery, specifically the uniform he won at the Battle of Marengo, which is what this painting commemorates. Napoleon asked to be shown as calm on a fiery horse, and David seems to have given him what he wanted. So it's a highly rhetorical depiction of the ruler. The composition is balanced and relies on Napoleon's strength. It emphasizes his solidity, his reliability. En marche is the message here. But the setting is also artificial and contrived, designed to echo the magnificence of the sitter. His surname Bonaparte is carved into the earth alongside names Hannibal and Carolus Magnus, Charlemagne, names associated with crossing the Alps. This is the St. Bernard Pass, and Napoleon is shown in the front foreground, much larger than his struggling troops trudging their way up the Alpine Pass. So everything about this portrait is designed to idealize and elevate that sitter. It even has a white ground, and you can see this whiteness almost pulse through the background, emphasizing the sitter's divinity. Illuminated from the left, magnificent. This is an image of Napoleon, both a military leader with terrestrial ambition, but also an almost divine one, a quasi-divine leader. David must have considered the precedent of Marcus Aurelius, shown here in his bronze equestrian portrait from the 2nd century AD. In the bronze portrait of Aurelius, who is a famous Stoic philosopher, he's shown with his arm raised in a similar way to Napoleon's. an expansive gesture, magnanimous. Instead, David shows Napoleon targeting upwards. It's direct. It's a reference back to modernity. It's using a famous classical prototype, but adapting it. You can also see that whereas in our painting we see 2 hooves off the ground, in the bronze we only have 1. Perhaps David is saying that painting is triumphing over sculpture in this case, Napoleon triumphing over the past. Napoleon is also shown without a beard, unlike Aurelius. For Roman emperors, since Hadrian, a beard connoted scholarship. Hadrian, Aurelius are showing themselves not only as military leaders, but as scholar emperors. David chooses instead to emphasize the youthful vigor of Napoleon, as both a leader of his people and a vigorous, almost a mountaineer. But was he a mountaineer? Well, in reality, we know that Napoleon followed 2 days behind his troops rather than leading from the front. Here, 49 years on, Paul Delaroche gives us another telling of the story, of the history. Here, Napoleon appears almost fragile, frail. There's nothing wrong with showing weakness, but perhaps Napoleon wouldn't have accepted this as a portrait. It's less idealized. He's shown on a mule rather than a fiery Arabian stallion. But is this painting any more truthful? Well, with 49 years hindsight, you could argue it's more realistic. But painting, art in general, is still a lie which tells the truth. These are other images of Elizabeth I. On the left, the famous Ditchley portrait with the clouds parting, a statement of forgiveness for one of her famous courtiers. On the right, the consummate image of Gloriana, with her glorious gold brocaded garment, as well as the globus cruciger, which she holds in her left hand, a globe with a cross on top, which implies her terrestrial but also spiritual ambitions as a ruler of England. These are different visions of the same monarch, and yet they seem to be communicating different propaganda purposes. Take a breather. In this second activity, I want you to consider the following images. You'll see 2 slides. Your question is, how many images can you see in each slide? Secondly, what are the different ways in which the images are being used here? So how many images can you see per slide? And how are they being used? Here's your first image. Shepard Fairey's famous poster of Barack Obama ahead of his election in 2008. And here, an Instagram post by the Broad Museum. Come back to me in a moment. How many images do you see here? Well, I see Obama himself. I see the words hope. And I see the campaign logo, the O with the stripes in red and white. So I see 3 images here. But the number of images is less important than what they mean. Here, Obama, his features are simplified, universalized. He becomes almost more of a symbol than an identifiable likeness, although we can still recognize the sitter. His face is divided into 2, with slightly more space occupied by blue than red. This reminds us that he was a Democrat, but it also tells us that in order to gain the presidency, he needed to court Republican votes. Red is the color associated with the Republican Party. So we see the image of Obama, and we see the association between Obama and hope. The association is clear. This man represents an aspiration for the people. Moreover, the campaign logo tells us that this is officially sanctioned by the Obama campaign, despite being produced without their commission. So it sends a strong message, and indeed it wasn't originally designed to be viewed on a screen only, but it was posted around the country. a universal image, successfully distributed, advertising the sitter, the presidential candidate. Was it successful? You bet. Here's another image, and you'll see that the history of art is not just a sterile discussion about paintings and sculptures, but also a contemporary discussion designed to enlighten you as to the world you see around us. Here, the Broad Museum are trying to promote President's Day. For the first time ever, the Broad will be open the entire museum on a Monday for President's Day. So this is a different kind of meaning. This image is being used to promote, but also to advertise. If we read the caption, it says, "We're dressed to match and ready for Monday with this t-shirt from the shop at the Broad." The girl wears a t-shirt emblazoned with Jasper Johns' flag. She also stands in front of the painting. So these images are being used for different purposes. To promote President's Day at the Broad, to sell a t-shirt, but also to celebrate, using the American flag to do so. We can see an emoji in the bottom right-hand corner. I often think emojis are often contemporary hieroglyphics. Perhaps we're moving towards a more visual language. But that's a question for another day. The question for here is why they focused on Jasper Johns' painting. Let's look more closely. Is this just any old flag? Well, it's the American flag. So it directly relates to President's Day. But it's not a flag. It's a painting of a flag. It's an image of an image. It's also not immaculate. If you look closely, you can see it's collage. You can see it's imperfect. And by being placed in the white-walled context, the white cube of the gallery, it almost intends to sanctify the American flag, to elevate the work of art and what it conveys. Except what is conveyed is not clear. Was Jasper Johns merely celebrating the flag, the stars and stripes, the Star-Spangled Banner, in a triumphalist way? Looking at the imperfections in the surface, I'd suggest there's something deeper here. If we look at the date, 1967, the Vietnam War was raging, and the idea of a more holy union being encapsulated by a flag is being critiqued. Jasper Johns is critiquing. He's skeptical of the idea as a flag, as a symbol of unity. Indeed, he's calling attention to its imperfections by juxtaposing paint with newsprint. Here's the original version of Jasper Johns' painting from about 11 years previous. Here, the imperfections in the surface of the canvas are more clear. Indeed, you can see that this is a mixed media work, combining hot wax painting, known as encaustic, which is an old Roman form of painting, with oil, as well as collage on canvas. So this is an image of an image. But why? Why did Jasper Johns choose a flag? Why not actually paint a painting? Well, what could be more flat than a flag? Jasper Johns is calling attention to the artificiality of painting. Indeed, all the paintings we've discussed today have tried to create the illusion of three-dimensionality on a 2D surface. Jasper Johns is calling that out for what it is, a lie, but perhaps a lie that tells the truth. So he's painting an image of the flag, and he's calling attention to the difference between each different star. He's individualizing each different state. And he's saying that a flag is not an immaculate symbol of unity, but actually a site for discussion, skepticism, critique, one that we need to keep revising and keep understanding. Jasper Johns shows us that art is a means to understanding history, not just art history,